Alright, everybody, I have donned full-on pantaloons. I mean that in a way of like, I succeeded. So, here goes. A lot of people probably not even gonna understand what the hell that meant. Uh, oh yeah, pantaloons. Okay, so, sometimes when I spawn, I fire my weapon. So what you're seeing right now is the end results of a whole fucking crap load of trying to figure out how to make this work in a way that doesn't suck. And in the end, uh, unless there is a technical problem um, along the lines of like drawing lots of traces, all the sound effects are the same. So what you just heard was I think a mega health spawning on two different clients at the same time. See, there's two. This guy, there's a guy here. Oh, he fired his gun. Ah, fuck. What was I talking about? Well, anyway, it solves everything. The only stuff that isn't set up now at the moment is the guns themselves don't have their stats set up, and then the projectiles and how the impacts are going to work is not hooked up yet. But if you notice, I can fire my gun. The players now you can just see their collision volume. So when you're fighting other players, you see the collision volume like that. So I can fire my shotgun. This is a single barrel. As you know, it's firing 4 pellets. All right. Now over here, this block is a super shotgun, and I know you can't tell that I switched to it because it's the same exact weapon model and icon and stuff like that. But you'll notice that I have 39 shells right now, and I fire. It went down by 2, and there are 8 projectiles instead of just 4. Yeah, see? So the super shotgun fires slightly slower. At the moment, I have melee set up. You notice that the model changed because I switched to the melee weapon. I just set the melee weapon to not have a model. So you can at least see that something happens when I switch weapons. The way this projectile is going to work, I don't have it hooked up yet, for the melee weapon, is that it's just going to be a trace like right in front of the character, and if the trace hits something, boom, then it does its whole thing, just like that. But right now, it fires a shotgun shell, so a single pellet. And like the limited ammo and everything like that, that's all hooked up. So if I switch to the super shotgun, boom, 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 boom. Wait, yeah, I can't fire anymore because I don't have enough shotgun shells for the super shotguns. There's not enough ammo in the upper corner, and it looks like that is in fact visible. And I fired my last shotgun shell, but the little white box says that I have a super shotgun. Now there I go again. So this method, I'm going to go into detail about exactly what it is. It's all tracing. I'm not using projectiles. I'm faking the projectiles. And if you notice, the projectile, well, I guess I'm faking it like anything in the game is actually real, but I'm using traces, a lot of traces. Jesus Christ, it's so loud. I don't know if it's gonna be loud for you guys, but man, freaking shit is loud for me. I'm having the actual projectile spawn in the exact position of where I am currently staying and currently aiming. So a projectile spawns there, And then the projectile, rather than actually being a true projectile, just begins doing traces until it hits something. So I'll go into that. But the beauty of this is that it works really well. Like, you're not having to deal with all of the weird wonkiness where fucking projectiles are just exploding for no reason. Traces allow me to like move around fully. I can hit the enemy, other players perfectly. Like, seriously, perfectly. See, like, I'm aiming right there. It comes from the center of the screen. The projectiles come from the center of the screen, so I can walk up to a corner and I could fire like this, right? And in a lot of games, if you can't, you have that effect where it's like, if the projectile is coming from the gun model, then right now it would probably hit the wall. Or if it was coming from the side of the screen and I was trying to shoot around the corner right here like this, it would look weird because the gun would be would fire right into the wall. Most games fire from the center of the screen, and even the ones that don't look like they are usually are faking. They have like a client-side projectile that just like gets made that looks like it's coming from the gun, but in reality, the actual bullet came from the center of the screen. So right now, what you have is just center of the screen, and it feels really good. Like, I can actually kind of imagine playing this right now. I'm shooting at this guy with the single barrel. It feels pretty decent. Okay, so let me exit out of this, and let me go into QT projectile. So as soon as the projectile spawns, begin play, I have it execute a begin projectile thingy, and trace channel had to be set to camera because visibility for some reason would do weird stuff, and I'm not exactly sure what the trace channel camera really entails, but it won't work when shooting other players and having it ignore things like pickups and stuff like that unless it's set to camera. So it seems to be working really well. Now there's a draw debug type. I'm going to do for duration, and now this is just going to be just to show you how the traces are actually being done. Now you also see like all this stuff over here, like I've done a whole bunch of work towards figuring out what the structure of everything's going to be. The projectile and the gun, for example, are not going to be when what apply the damage to the target that you're shooting. Actually, it's going to be the impact. The impact is going to be specified, so it's like impact effect or explosion. So anytime you have an explosion that spawns, the explosion will be what applies the damage. Anytime you have an impact effect, the impact effect will figure out what it hit, what was hit, and what to do to apply damage to the players or objects or anything. So the structure's changed quite a bit, but this is going to work. The only fear that I have is doing more advanced trace stuff. Let me get only one client. Okay. Now keep in mind when it says 0 seconds up in the upper right, that's when the mega health spawns and you'll hear an extra gunshot. Okay. Alright. I fire. Oh, that's right, it's all happening on the server. You won't be able to actually see the debug traces. So these projectiles are really fast. The shotgun, you might notice that if I fire the gun, it doesn't quite hit the target like instantly. It's because they're just moving really fast. These are really fast moving traces. Normally traces are pretty instant. But the way that it works is the trace goes for a certain distance based on the projectile's the speed of the projectile, and it goes through and determines whether or not it hit something. If it did not hit anything, then I set the location of the projectile to the new spot at the end of the trace. Then, with a delay of 0.01, I go all the way back, and then I do another trace for the same distance, and it just like goes through. My first impression of this, like my first worry about this, was that it's going to be like really weird looking, but actually, and for some weird reason, it ends up kind of looking all right. Like it kind of looks like the projectiles I've seen in other games like Quake and stuff. I think that they do something like this. I think they actually do it this way, or something, because it doesn't feel too strange. So if I take the shotgun pellet and I'm gonna slow it down by a lot, so I'm gonna say 10, right? And so that's the projectile. The size of the projectile, I'll just leave that at 0. So another important thing to keep in mind here is that sphere traced by channel. So there's a few different types of traces. You'll have trace by channel, right? There's line. There's multi-box. I don't even know what that is. Multi-line by channel. There's a sphere by channel, and you could do a box by channel or a capsule by channel. So when it does its trace, it's actually tracing the shape of the object. I don't know how much more expensive these traces are, but these weapons in their current state are going to spawn quite a few of them. In fact, when I'm showing the traces. So like this is a really slow projectile. Right? And at that point it hit 10 seconds before the lifespan of the projectile hit 10 seconds. So you're looking at trace projectiles. Now, if this doesn't cause some crazy-ass performance problem, then we're in pretty good shape. The traces are all happening on the server. And if you're a client, the only thing you're going to see is the position of the object. So if I go run dedicated server, I'm the only client. If I'm connected to the server, yeah, see, I'm not seeing the trace anymore because the trace is irrelevant to me. All I'm seeing is where the projectile currently is. And, I can't hit myself with my own bullets. Which I think in some cases you probably should be able to hit yourself with your own bullet if it's moving this. If your bullet's ever moving this slowly, you should probably hit yourself with it. But fuck that. I don't think that's very common in most games. And these things can only live about 10 seconds, and they look a little funny. But I have no idea how this is going to be with somebody, running around with 300 ping dealing with these fuckers. So with that said, the only thing that I'm afraid of at this point is the grenade launcher. Like, how do I make the grenades bounce? And I kind of already understand how I'm going to do it. I'm just going to modify the yaw, or is it the pitch? Well, one of the rotation angles for forward vector, like up and down. And basically what that's going to be is like every time a trace is done, I subtract a little bit from that rotation, and that'll cause it to arc. and when it hits an object, I get the vector from that position of where it impacted, and then make that the new direction that the object is going. But it'll be always just losing velocity, so it'll be going slower and slower until eventually it just sits on the ground. With every single bounce, it'll just be slower and slower. I think this is going to work. I think it feels a hell of a lot better than what was there when I first started. And also, too, let's be honest here, like, they really messed up a little bit when they had the FPS template and they had those, like, projectile ball things as the default thing. It was a lie. Those things are shit. You can't use them for anything. Not anything decent. I mean, you could use them for, like, a little tiny, like, top-down shooter or some shit, but you can't. Not for a fucking FPS. You can't have projectiles spawning in front of your face. Like, you have to be able to walk up to a wall and fire your fucking gun and have the bullets actually hit the wall. I know my weapon model is going into the wall, which is another thing that needs to get fixed. I should be able to, like, make sure that this object always draws last on the screen, but this solves that whole entire issue of having somebody stand right next to me and not get hit, and I'm not dealing with weird collision. I could fire my gun through the pickups, and it's not a problem. Now, I'm pretty sure that there's probably a better way to handle how the traces are being done. Like, there may actually be a way to do some kind of a thing where you do a constant trace. Like, you do one trace and then you just calculate the amount of time or something like that. But I think for the most part, this just works at the moment. I don't know how bad it's going to be when we get 32 players on the server all firing these fucking things at the same time. So the main changes that happened in the player character, and we're just gonna go step by step over everything I did. Okay, so if you look in the actions graph, you notice I got rid of that whole monstrosity of having, like, two different for pressed and released. I'm doing something a little bit more hacky this time. It at least doesn't. It's not as bad as the other thing, though. The other thing just. I looked at that and I'm like, I'm obviously doing something wrong. So basically, all this is doing is setting a boolean to true, and then since this happens on both the client and the server at the same time, or it may only happen on the client, my input action, I have to actually say, "Hey server, check this out. This is something that needs to be tracked." Like, the player is pulling down is now pulling the trigger. So I go weapon trigger status. That means I'm pulling the trigger, which is on my character, and I do a RPC, which is on the server, to say, "Hey server, player is now pulling the trigger." I then check to see if equipped weapon is valid, because it's actually possible sometimes to not have a valid weapon equipped. I'm trying to, like, solve that, but when you first fucking spawn, you press the fire button to spawn, which I might have to change that to, like, spacebar or something, because pressing the fire button automatically, I'm spawning trying to fire a gun that I haven't even equipped yet. It kind of sucks. So anyway, I go to this. So I grab a function. I call a function on my weapon, the weapon that I currently have equipped. right? And now I open up QT weapon. QT weapon passes the trigger status over, and it checks to see if active weapon refire delay is above 0. So whenever the gun goes into a state where, hey, I fired something, I grab the rate of fire floating point variable and set it to active weapon refire delay. When active weapon refire delay is set, it then fires a sequence, which then does two different things. One, it goes way ahead and lets a shot go through. Well, lets a weapon ammo check go through, which is now back on the main character again. So I'm doing all of this just for the status of the trigger. Okay, the trigger is now being pulled. The gun realizes that the trigger is being pulled. The hammer is cocking back. It's getting ready. It fires one shot off, and then it goes into a loop over here. So after it fires, when it fires the first shot, it also gets ready to load up, cock the hammer back again for the weapon refire delay. Weapon refire delay checks if the status. It checks the status of the weapon refire delay in a branch. If it's above 0, true, then at a 0.1 delay, I subtract 0.1 from weapon refire delay and circle around, do the same thing. So this is going to keep happening. This variable is going to keep getting smaller until it reaches 0. In which case, that's going to take, a couple, maybe a second and a half or half a second or whatever. It happens really quickly. So it just goes through this and do for as long as it takes with this delay here. Once it reaches 0, I go to condition false, where it circles back around and goes to trigger status. Now you notice that I set trigger status here. Trigger status will be turned on and off depending on whatever happens because this function is being called in Qt character. If I release it, then it makes this false, and then this will end up being false. That'll be false. If this ends up being false and it goes through all of this whole thing, it just puts itself back into a readied state where I can switch back to the weapon and fire it. Now the reason why I have to do this on the weapon, the reason why I went through all the extra trouble to communicate to, hey weapon, you have a refire delay, rather than just doing it on the character, is because you have X number of weapons in your arsenal, and they're all sitting in your backpack. And let's just say, for argument's sake, we make a gun that has a refire delay where you can only fire one shot every 10 seconds. Actually, let's say if I have like 3 or 4 of these kinds of guns. I could fire this gun once every 30 seconds. I could fire this gun once every 10. I could fire this one once every 5. You have to switch to the weapon, fire it, and then on the weapon itself, it keeps track of this. So this is actually going on even if it's not the equipped weapon. So you can have, if you want to, you can use this blueprint to create some kind of like magical game like Hexen or Heretic or something like that, where you have like cooldowns. And when you use the cooldown once, you have to switch to another thing. So it's like Quake mixed with something like that. Like you could fire it one time, and then you got to switch to a different weapon because it's going to be on cooldown for the next 30 seconds. You could totally do that with this now. And it's pretty easy to set it up to show like all of the different guns and their current delays. I'm not going to do that in this, but it's very easy to hook up. In fact, I might just hook up a widget on the HUD that tracks the weapon delays. But these weapons, the weapons that I currently have, are going to have fairly short weapon refire delays, so it's probably not very useful. It might just be neat to have it on the HUD. So, weapon ammo check. Okay. This is happening currently on the server, and this has barely changed since the last time you've seen it. In fact, it's doing pretty much exactly the same thing. I haven't changed anything other than the fact that it's no longer inside of a macro. It was just pie in the sky. The reason why I can't use macros is because I need to be able to call these RPCs. Every one of these things, whether or not it's happening on the server or happening on the client, is just too important for me to try to be super neat about what goes on. The only thing that hasn't, the only thing that has changed is that I call it find crosshair on the when you fire the gun. So this goes through and it figures out what ammo type matches the ammo type that is in your inventory, and if it turns out to be true, then check to see if the amount of ammo that you currently have as a player, or the ammo cost, is greater than or equal to the amount of ammo that you have in that satchel. So again, when it comes to ammo, you're holding a satchel in your inventory, and the satchel carries all the bullets. This goes through, if you do have enough, if your ammo amount is greater than or equal to, if what you have in your satchel is greater than or equal to the cost to fire the weapon, is true, then I say weapon ammo check status equals true. Then I modify the ammo by the amount on the ammo cost, and the for each loop completes, it goes through here. It's this. You got weapon ammo check status. If it turns out to be false, then you're not enough ammo, which I have to do a function right there for playing a sound words, dry firing the weapon. I joked about it last time. I like blah blah blah. Okay, now this is different. Find crosshair. So I'm doing something that has to be on the client. Okay. Now this is deceiving. There's two different ways you can make something happen on the client. I'm sure there are more ways, but I'm only focusing on two different ways, on two main ways that are that I currently think of in the top of my head. One is to just say no, not replicated. That means it's not replicated over a network. It only happens on the client, and that is it. All right? When that happens, it's only on the client. Now, when you say executes on owning client, it's deceiving, because you're probably thinking, oh, it just means that only the client's running it. No, the only way to make that happen is not replicated at all. Running on owning client means the server has to actually say, hey, client, you do this right now. So the server is involved when you have an RPC that says run an owning client. So right now, at this point in time, the server, all this stuff that's happening completely on the server is now saying, hey, client, I want you to go to the player controller, grab the viewport size. So this is the size of your screen, basically, like your resolution. So if you're running a 1912 by 1080 or whatever, it's going to take those two variables for the x and y coordinates on those, and divide them by 2 so that it gets the exact half. Now it's going to place it. I'm getting the exact coordinates in the world location on the screen of exactly where the center of your screen is in the world space. So like you have the whole world. I'm figuring out exactly where the middle of your screen is currently. I make it. I feed it to a replicating variable. For some reason, if I try to just feed this directly into the next thing, which is happening on the server, it'll just be zeros. It'll be the center of the world every single time. But if I feed it through a replicating variable like this, it handles it. So now I run spawn projectile. Now spawn projectile happens on the server again. So I had to like take a pit stop. Like what's going on the client? So also too, if you're gonna write your aim hack bots, you're looking at the spot right here. Here's your hook. All right. If you want to be a cheater and you want to write a script or some shit to fuck with the local memory, here you go. This is where you write your aim hacks. I get the spawn projectile. There's a for loop. Now, a for loop happens X number of times. It's based on an index. So, I'm never going to make a gun that fires zero projectiles. So it's always going to be first index. Then I get the number of projectiles that are fired. So in the case of the super shotgun, it's 8. In the case of the single barrel shotgun, it is just 4. Now this is coming from equipped weapon to weapon stats. So it's grabbing the struct from my equipped weapon, and now I have all this neat stuff to play with. So number of projectiles is being fed into a for loop, which is then I'm spawning the actor. So I have the position of the crosshair location, but what I also and I feed it into the part of the transform, but now I need to figure out what direction it's being faced. So I have a point in space, but now I need to know where I'm aiming. Where's the player aiming? Actually, come to think of it, you couldn't use this for doing an aim hack because the aiming is coming from here. Anyway, it would end up being way more complicated. I don't even know why I'm joking about it. But anyway, get control rotation is where you are currently aiming client on the client. But it can still be accessed very easily through even while you're on the server. So I grab these variables and I figure out I break the rotator. I break the rotator. Sounds kind of like dropping the bass or something, break the rotator. And this is kind of mathy right here. But basically what's happening is I'm taking the pitch and yaw. So like this is, I'm not even bothering with roll. I'm figuring out like if the weapon has spread. So I have the direction that the weapon's being aimed, but now I need to figure out what the spread is going to be for shotguns and stuff like that. So I grab 2 different random floats in range. And the random floats in range are would it be here in QT weapon if I was going to be able to get a let me grab a weapon. So I'm going to go shotgun. So the projectile spread is 1.8 and I'm adding 1.8 to the rotation. I have the first one has to be a negative number so that it equals, so that if you just add, then in your random int will end up somewhere somewhere on here on the grid. You're looking at it backwards, by the way. For you, it would be on this side. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so if you're looking at the grid, uh, actually, let me use the screen. So, like, here's the center, right? Um, you're gonna just see what happens. So the bullet on the random int can only appear on this side if it's only positive numbers, because it's adding to this. So you have to have a range between a negative and a positive. So the range, I just take the same exact number for what the spread is, multiply it by -1 to get a negative number, and then just input the regular number into the max. So the minimum and the max. Now I have a full cone of spread for wherever the weapons are going to fire. Okay, so I get in all that. I do the spawn actor thing. The for loop, if the number of projectiles is like 4 or 8, it does this really quickly, like practically in one frame. Just pow, spawns all 8 of them in random fucking directions, and all that shit all happens instantly. And it creates the projectile that is currently specified in the weapon struct. So the weapon determines what the projectile is. It fires the bullet. Once it's complete, I go through here and then I play the weapon fire sound once. Make sure you don't do anything when you're doing a loop. Don't play sounds in loops, because this happens instantly. It would be like one really loud gunshot, because it would play it X number of times, like at the same time. Just watch your sound channels get like totally screwed. And that's it. As far as this. So the projectile now. The projectile itself, I have to make sure that it only happens on the server, otherwise there will be deceivingly 2 projectiles, which isn't cool, and then it's a little weird. I get the forward vector. So you just imagine that I just spawned this little, like, these objects right at the center of my screen, and now they're all facing the right direction, right? So now all I have to do this time is just grab the forward vector and multiply it by the speed, which is just how far the trace is going to be, and that'll be the end of the trace. Boom. So you have a location has to be added for the vector, otherwise the vector will just be like, it'll be the 0, everything will be correct, but it'll be at 0. It'll be in the middle of the world for no reason. So you have to set up the actor location. And that's really simple because I already know that the actor is sitting in the correct spot. I made sure all of that stuff was going to happen. So this is something that's just completely happening, completely on its own, and is completely independent of the other thing. All I know is that I just spawned the object, and now the object is going to work autonomously, without any of my, any more interference with my character. Which is pretty much how projectiles work anyway, right? And I already went through how that works. Well, if it turns out that this projectile does collide with something, then I get the exact location and convert it into a transform and spawn the impact effect. Right now, I only have one impact effect, but the impact effect things are going to have to be a lot more complicated. There's going to have to be a whole bunch of them, like for different types of weapons. Like the super nail gun will probably fire a different type of projectile just so that it can be more damaging. Because the regular nail gun and the super nail gun weren't really that different in terms of like rate of fire. The super nail gun was a little faster, but the super nail gun just did more damage. You know, actually, I don't know for sure about that. I just know that it was a much more deadly weapon and it may need its own projectile and impact effect, even if it's playing pretty much the same exact thing. As soon as it makes the impact effect, and the plan I'm gonna have in place after this is just gonna be like, I'm gonna have to feed it like the exact location and what the hit actor was and stuff like that. And it's really weird because hit actor actually does more than just actors. Like it tells me what brush. It tells me what brush got hit. It'll be like this is brush number 5 or whatever, and I'm like, how does it even these are static objects and they're supposed to be like just meshes, but it knows exactly like what brush and everything. But that's irrelevant. Is it an object with health is basically what I'm going to be looking for. So the impact effect spawns, and I'll have to have other logic in here for things like the fuse timer, whether or not it explodes. If it explodes and it has a fuse timer, then like it'll be like a grenade if it's affected by gravity. So there's a whole bunch more stuff that I need to get working on this front. So from this point on, this is stuff that's not implemented yet. You're just looking at the base bones of it. So if you're kind of curious to see like I made all the weapons already. I have all the projectiles for the weapons too, and I have impact effects for all of the guns as well, and I have explosions for the rocket and the grenade, and ammo's already works how it's supposed to. So I just need to input the weapon types. I don't know how long this video is. It turns out the video is like 40 fucking minutes long. Okay. I'm gonna cut it short on that front. Yeah, cut it short. I just said that. I'm gonna cut it short. It's 40 fucking minutes. You're watching Castle Does. Stay tuned for more. What I'm going to do in the next video is most likely just a nice time lapse of getting all the guns in a functional state, using the correct ammo, firing projectiles, hooking them up to base implementations to the impact effects, and all that jazz. And once that's in place, then I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on how the impact effects will actually affect the health of the targets. And then I'm also going to do things like floating numbers. So like there's an actual much easier way to do like damage indicator numbers and stuff like that. It's very easy to set that up, and it used to be a little bit harder, but there was stuff that was added fairly recently that makes these kinds of like things much easier to do. So very soon I'll have floating text and all kinds of stuff. And guns. Anyway, you're watching Castle Does. Stay tuned for more. Sorry for this fucking long video, but this is really a culmination of a lot of crap. Because figuring out how to do this was a giant headache, because this tech is fucking awful at projectiles right now, and there needs to be something done about it. Seriously. Alright. Take care.